Hi, I'm John from the Budget Advisory Group. After working on the budget since May, all parties have concluded to keep the association financially sound. An increase is necessary. As homeowners, we tried to avoid a fee increase, but as members of the Budget Advisory Group, we understood the need for an increase. I'd like to introduce Mary Alice and Williams so they can give you more detailed information.
Hi, I'm Mary Alice. In this video, we'll explain how over the past 5 months, the Budget Advisory Group developed our recommendation to the board based upon the 3 principles we established at the outset: to represent homeowners' interests, to operate transparently, and to be fiscally conservative. The budget sent to you by the board is based largely on our recommendation, and we want you to know that our interactions with the board were positive, informative, and collaborative. And now William will explain what will be covered in the video.
Thanks, Mary Alice. To make sure we're all speaking the same language, let's start by defining some terminology. This list of terms will be used repeatedly in this review. Capital means the capital contribution of $4,800 from new home sales that goes straight into cash. Cash means the operating account cash. Burning down cash means using operating account cash, decreasing the available cash balance. Expenses means the 2023 budget expenses. Fees means the monthly HOA fees paid by each homeowner. Fees and cash are the 2 sources used to pay expenses. Now that we have defined our terminology, let's review our agenda. For the sake of time, we are not repeating any of the topics we covered in our August video. You may want to watch the August video. First, let's get right to the main budget numbers. Then we will summarize our work over the last 5 months. We'll define the purpose of an HOA budget and our approach to the 2023 budget. We'll share our perspective on projecting capital and how to pay for the expenses. Next, we'll review the expenses, the budget calendar, and the options for you to provide feedback. We will wrap up by sharing some financial realities we have learned during the process. We don't want to keep you waiting any longer, so let's review the main budget numbers. As you have seen in the 2023 budget mailed to you by the board, total expenses are $1,040,000. The current fees of $200 would only cover $624,000, leaving a shortfall of $416,000. 25% of the shortfall will be covered by an increase in fees to $232. Raising $99,840. 75% will be covered by burning down cash of $316,160. We support this budget and ask for your support by voting to ratify it. Next, let's review the process of how these numbers were determined. The Budget Advisory Group started our work 5 months ago in May. While waiting for NOVA's proposed budget, we reviewed over 1,000 pages of financial records. We analyzed 5 years of financial statements and started reviewing the 2023 monthly financial statements. Based on our analysis, we developed a financial model and agreed on the assumptions and approach we would use for the 2023 budget. In July, we received an explanation of NOVA's proposed budget, which was 62 lines long. A large portion of the NOVA budget consists of contracted services. Based on our review of NOVA's budget, we decided to develop our own budget to present to the board. We used 2 methods to arrive at our budget numbers. When we began in May, we only had 5 months of this year's actual expenses, not enough to provide any meaningful guidance. Since 2021 was the last full year of actual expenses, for our first method, we used 2021 numbers with a combination inflation and growth factor for 2 years of 15%. Our second method was to project this year's total expenses based upon expenditure patterns in 2021. This gave us 2 reference points to determine our 2023 budget numbers. As we informed you back in July, estimating expenses for the villages was going to be a challenge. Here is how we handled the challenge. We used 2 factors to estimate the expenses for the villages: square footage and the expected number of months in operation. Even though we don't have any expenses history for the villages, we do for the pavilion. We used the square footage in the pavilion compared to square footage in the villages to estimate expenses. Once we had these estimates, we adjusted them for 5 months of expected villages operations. Before presenting our budget to the board, we provided our budget, assumptions, and approach for an independent review by a retired banker who has 35 years' experience as a vice president in commercial lending. He agreed our fiscally conservative approach was reasonable and sound. When we presented our proposed 2023 budget to the board, our proposal was $240,000 lower than the NOVA budget. The major differences were in 5 expense items that we believe should be deferred or substantially reduced. After our presentation, Steve Bay met with us to better understand our reasons for these 5 items. Steve was helpful in explaining the board's reasons for including the items in the 2023 budget. After our discussions, Steve supported our budget to the rest of the board and proposed a compromise on the 5 items. We met again with the entire board and negotiated an agreement. The board deferred 2 items to future years, we agreed to 2 items in 2023, and we negotiated a reduction on the 5th item. The final budget the board approved is $73,000 more than our original recommended budget. What we're presenting next is based on our presentation to the board. So what is the purpose of the HOA budget? The first is to establish a guide for managing expenses. Second, projecting expenses is a critical aid to determining fees. Let's review the Budget Advisory Group's approach to the 2023 budget. Creating a month-by-month budget projection during our community's build-out years can be overly complex. I will give an example in the next section. Since the purpose of our budget is to determine fees, we decided to keep our approach simple. Our approach is fiscally conservative, which means reasonable expectations for expenses and the sources to pay for those expenses. In May 2017, a budget projection was developed for a full build-out when all 814 homes were paying fees of $200. That 2017 budget has been the basis of our annual budgets for the last 5 years. That 2017 budget was needed then, but it's time to change. In our budget, expenses are based on actual expense history from financial statements. We're basing our revenue assumptions on an estimated 260 homes paying fees in 2023. This is how many homes we estimate will be closed and paying fees at the end of 2022. We are not relying on projected capital or fees from new home sales as a source of revenue to pay 2023 expenses. We will explain our perspective on projecting capital in the next section. Our recommended balance of fees and cash to pay the expenses was based on the latest financial statement in August 2022. In this section, we'll explain our perspective on projecting capital from new home sales. The capital contribution of $4,800 goes straight into the operating account. Let's review an example of how complex it can be to try to project future capital. To project capital, you need to make multiple assumptions. How many homes will be sold, built, and closed? When will they start paying capital and fees? How much additional expenses will each home add? Will the number of homes be consistent or fluctuate each month? When trying to make complex projections, the more assumptions made, the more chances of being wrong, which can lead to poor decisions. Here is a real example. The Oak Tree 2022 proposed budget was based on 60 new homes added in 2022. At the end of August, there are only 8 new homes in 2022. In our August video, we discussed how budget challenges and the current global uncertainties are reinforcing our decision to take a fiscally conservative approach to the 2023 budget. How many homes will be added in 2023? Your guess is as good as ours. It is difficult to project and rely on. So we decided to take a step back and look at the capital from a different perspective. We remembered the old saying, "Don't count your chickens before they hatch," which means you shouldn't depend on something hoped for until you know for certain that it will happen. Looking at capital from that perspective, we asked ourselves, where does the capital go? Directly to the operating account, or in our terminology, cash. Cash in the bank is highly dependable. We know we can rely on it to pay expenses. That is why we are taking the approach that fees and cash are the two sources used to pay expenses. Now, we are not ignoring the fact that new homes will be built in 2023, and we hope it's a lot, but we are just not relying on it to support 2023 expenses. All new capital in 2023 will accumulate in cash and be available to support the 2024 budget expenses. Next, let's review our recommendations for how to pay for the 2023 expenses. Our recommended balance of fees and cash to pay the expenses was based on the latest financial statement in August 2022. As we stated in the August video, the cash can help us get through the 10-plus year build-out period. Our charge is the 2023 budget, but we would be short-sighted if we didn't consider the remaining build-out period. So we don't want to use too much cash in any single year. The 2023 budget expenses are $1,040,000. The current fees of $200 would only cover $624,000, leaving a shortfall of $416,000. The available cash balance the end of August was $847,000. If we used all cash to cover the shortfall, it would use 49% of the cash as of the end of August. We thought using that high a percentage would be fiscally irresponsible, especially because we expect that by the end of 2022, the cash amount will be lower than $847,000. If we used all fees to cover the shortfall, it would raise fees to $333. None of us want to see that large of a fee increase. So we worked with the board to find a reasonable balance between cash and fees increase that we could all live with. We believe we found that reasonable balance, with 25% of the shortfall being covered by an increased fees to $232, which raises $99,840, and 75% being covered by burning down cash of $316,160. You can think of it this way. If we all pay around $1 more per day in fees, we will burn down cash of $3 per day to cover expenses. Next, let's discuss how we reviewed the expenses. After basing the expenses on actual expense history, the 2023 budget expenses were impacted by three main factors: inflation, programs, and the villages. As we have all experienced with the current high inflation, everything costs more. Every contract service rate for 2023 went up. For the expenses not on a contract, here is how we arrived at an inflation adjustment. As shown on the screen, starting with 2021 as our base, we adjusted for 2 years of inflation and home growth. Looking back 1 year, using the actual consumer price index inflation rate of 9.1%, and projecting forward 1 year, assuming 5.9% for 15% total. We also projected the 2022 total expenses based upon expenditure patterns in 2021. This gave us 2 reference points to determine our 2023 budget numbers. With the opening of the villages in 2023, the planned programs for our community will grow. The fitness program will begin, and the lifestyles program will expand the number of hosted functions and social events. Taylor Morrison has experience with numerous 55-plus communities with programs across the country. The lifestyle programs are managed by Evergreen, a Taylor Morrison subsidiary. These communities commonly have social events budgets of $100,000 per year. The social events budget was one of the expense items we negotiated a reduction. Our HOA board had already pushed back against Evergreen wanting a $100,000 social events budget and reduced it to $49,000. We negotiated a further reduction to $42,000. Social events is a perfect example of a budget expense that homeowners have different opinions on the value of and how much should be budgeted for that specific expense. We understand some may disagree with the amount of specific expenses. But with 260 homes and 500 people, there are always going to be differences in opinions. It's impossible to make everybody happy. Agree or disagree with the social events budget, this item will cost homeowners $3.38 per month in fees. Finally, the opening of the villages in 2023 has a large impact on the budget expenses. The villages account for $105,000 of expenses for 5 months of operation. The good news is you're going to like what you get. The bad news is we have to pay for it. We want to review the calendar for the next month and your options for providing feedback. We will contribute an article in the November issue of the Ovation Nation newsletter. November 16th at 4 p.m. is the HOA Budget Ratification Meeting. Before the November 16th ratification meeting, we are providing 2 options for your feedback and questions to us and the board. First, written feedback can be provided using the request area on the HOA portal. We'd appreciate your written comments, but we may not be able to respond to every comment. The Budget Advisory Group and the full HOA board will receive all the input received on the portal. If you have questions, use our second option. Questions can be asked during our office hours at the Pavilion on October 19th from 3 to 4 p.m. The sole purpose of the office hours is to meet with homeowner families individually to answer your questions. If you want to provide comments, feedback, please use the portal for that. Future office hours, if needed, will be scheduled and announced at a later date. We'd like to wrap up by sharing 5 financial realities that we have learned over the last 5 months. The first financial reality is the significance of the factor that our community is still in the build-out phase. We shared this with you in our August video, but we felt it was important enough to share again. The total number of homes planned to be built in our community is 814. With 260 at the start of 2023, that equals a 32% community build-out. We built a conservative scenario, assuming Taylor Morrison builds and closes sales on 50 new homes per year. Their goal is 60. Our build-out period looks like this. Let's look at an example of the impact of this over the build-out period using a hypothetical $814 expense. When we have 814 homes built, each homeowner's share of $814 expense will be $1. In 2023, each homeowner's share of the $814 would be $3.13. The dollar amount for each homeowner's share decreases each year as more homes are built, since there will be more homeowners to cover the expenses. The second financial reality is the cash accumulated in the operating account. We had accumulated over the last few years a cash balance of $1 million. Those days are over. Between the lack of new home sales in 2022 providing capital and our low fees, we are already burning down cash this year. It's difficult to project exactly, but by the end of 2022, we expect our cash balance to be closer to $500,000 than $1 million. This is another reason we are uncomfortable using more than $316,000 of our cash to cover 2023 expenses. The third financial reality is there's nothing magical about the current $200 fee, and there was no guarantee it would never increase. If you got that feeling from the sales team when you bought your home, they were basing it on history. They couldn't predict the pandemic, inflation, and all the uncertainties we are experiencing. The current $200 fee was never based on actual expenses because it was calculated at the very beginning of the Ovation community. Fees need to be adjusted to pay actual expenses. Fourth, you may feel Taylor Morrison should pay for certain expenses, but the CCRs determine who is responsible for paying which expenses. The Villages is a perfect example. Taylor Morrison is responsible for the cost of building the Villages. The HOA is responsible for paying the expenses to operate the Villages. We have heard some differences of opinion on when the Villages should have been completed. 2023 falls into the originally planned time frame for completion. The fifth and final financial reality is what can happen when an HOA doesn't keep up with expenses and reserves. During our research, we learned about an HOA board that had not raised fees for 10 years. Not raising fees was a source of pride for that board. When a large unexpected expense occurred, that board had to make a major fee increase and levy a special assessment on each home. In closing, early in our process, we agreed our approach should protect our community from getting anywhere near a special assessment. So we adopted our fiscally conservative approach to the budget. Our main reason for taking this approach is the financial health and strength of our Oak Tree HOA can have a positive or negative effect on the value of our homes. A well-funded HOA is an asset. An underfunded HOA is a liability. We want our HOA to be well-funded, so it is a positive asset. Some homeowners may disagree with our approach. That's okay. There is more than one way to approach a budget. Some homeowners may disagree with the budget amount for a specific expense. With 260 homes and 500 people, there's always going to be differences in opinion. That's okay. The three of us didn't always agree on the amount for every expense in the final budget. We worked to find an amount that was reasonable. After 5 months of working on the 2023 budget, we feel we have a reasonable budget for 2023 that will keep our HOA fiscally healthy going into 2024. You can think of it this way. If we all pay around $1 more per day in fees, we will keep our HOA financially sound. We are asking for your support by voting yes to ratify the 2023 budget. 2023 is going to be an exciting and important year for our community.
We take very seriously our role in contributing to it being a successful one.
Thanks for watching.